Okay, guys, let's go ahead and get this started. This should be the start of video number 4, I believe. So let's go ahead and take a look at consumerism. Now, we discussed a lot of different things in the last video about Eisenhower. The 1950s are, again, a return to normalcy. It's good times. The war's over. Veterans are going to school. The people are moving to the Sun Belt for jobs. That the people are doing lots of marital things. The baby boom. You're talking about suburban living, Levittowns, and the growth of the suburbs. But when we also talk about the 1950s, we need to talk about consumerism as well. Now, this should sound very, very familiar to you. Oh, wait, of course it sounds familiar to you. You learned it, but it's not the 1950s. You learned it in the 1920s, because the 1950s and the 1920s are extremely alike in the fact that they're post-war economies. Consumerism, by definition, you see that part in your notes? Let's get this down. Is the economy driven by the consumer? And of course, consumer, that specifically means the people. In a time of war, the economy is driven by the war. Of course it is. Everybody goes to work in factories to produce war materials. The men go off. We ration. We buy bonds, all that kind of stuff. But the war's over. So now, give me my vacuum cleaner, please. Give me my washer and dryer, my toaster, everything I want. In the 1920s, it was a Model T and a radio. This time, it's going to be a Chevy and a TV. Consumerism is that economy based on the consumers. Americans were caught up in that economic boom that took place after World War II. So you'll notice again, consumer credit is going to go up. Okay, with that, you're going to have lots of different things. The first card, by the way, by card I mean credit card, comes out in 1950, and it's called the diner's card. Kind of interesting to know. What was bought? All kinds of different stuff was bought. We're going to watch a video in class where you're going to write 4 things that were bought, but I bet you can already guess some things. Cars is going to be one of them. Now, because we're starting to talk about cars, let's talk about the Highway Act, shall we? Highway Act, 1956, by Eisenhower. 42,000 miles of interstate highway put in place linking major cities. Now, the highways are not anything new for this country. We've always had transportation as our #1 goal. Think about the American system way back last semester. John C. Calhoun, the Transcontinental Railroad, that national road that came through Cumberland, and all of those areas right there. And every single place that a road went or the railroad went popped up a city. Well, now we want to link those major cities together, and sometimes a highway can make or break a city. Think about Amarillo. How much money do you think comes through Amarillo because of I-40, or it used to be Route 66? I'm telling you right now, I worked at Outback. All of the money that I paid to go to college came from Outback because people were traveling through on I-40. I don't know if y'all have ever seen, this would be a good question, a quiz question to see if you were listening. I don't know if y'all have seen that movie Cars, Death by Highway. If a highway was built not through the middle of your city, but through another city and bypassed your city, sometimes that means your economy stunk. But I'll be really honest with you. Eisenhower, don't get me wrong, he wants to improve the economy. He's the president, of course he does. He wants people to vote for him again. I like Ike, right? But the big real reason he wants it, I want you to make sure you circle improve national defense. He spends $32 billion taking and putting all of these highways down. He also knows it's good for jobs. It's good for trucking. It's kind of bad for the poor, but he thinks that it'll help increase that middle class and create that middle class economy. And he's right, it will. But you want to know the real reason General Eisenhower of D-Day wants the highways? Because now if you blanket this economy, or in this whole country, in highways, not only does it help the economy, but now can I get missile supplies from my Sun Belt missile defense factories to Florida real quick. Yeah, that's right. I specifically said from the Sun Belt to Florida, because what's 90 miles away from Florida? Cuba, which we're going to have a problem with in a little bit. But it's more than that. Can I get this stuff all the way from the Sun Belt over to Washington, D.C. or New York? Or can I get places from here to here to here on the highways? Transportation of supplies is a massively important thing, and Eisenhower knows that. So he says specifically, let's build some highways. Now, the culture of the car comes along with this as well. I'm just going to be honest with you. I didn't even put this as a slide. I just kind of put it in between. I put car registrations. In 1945, there were 25 million car registrations. Well, that was the end of the war. By just a decade or so later, that 25 million turns to 60 millions. 2 family cars doubles from 1951 to 58, meaning the number of families that have 2 cars instead of 1 car. Literally, that number doubles in the 1950s. The culture of the car, and I didn't really give y'all a lot in this slides, but I just kind of want to talk about it a little bit, maybe make a little word splash out to the side or something like that. But it also changes the way we live. I know the Model T, we talked about it and everything, but you got to really think about a country full of car nows. Things like, good quiz question if you were listening, Disneyland opens in 1955 in Southern California. 40% of the guests come from outside of California, mostly by car. The interesting thing about Disneyland actually is that it also has things like Tomorrowland and all this new technology and stuff like that. And it's kind of symbolic of the 1950s as well. Main Street, Frontierland, going from Frontier to Tomorrowland, that transition that the 50s is going to be. The culture of the car, the first McDonald's, 1955. The first real hotel chain, it's called Howard Johnson's, they called it the Hojo, in 1950s. Drive-in movies is something massively important in the 1950s. But it creates almost this, again, adolescent culture that kind of happens after World War I, and it'll again happen after World War II. The 20s and the 50s, very similar. But I'll be real honest with you. You want to know the real cool reason about this? Is she get to look some freaking cool cars up. The Chevy Corvettes, the pink Cadillacs. My dad, my family, oh my gosh, we are the biggest car junkies there are. I think we have a total of like 7 or 8 cars for only 3 people when I was growing up. My dad has an El Camino. He has a Chevelle. Oh my gosh, that's my entire inheritance in his garage, which is 4-car garage, by the way. Ridiculous. All right, so television. Let's talk about it. Talked enough about cars, although I can't explain how important that is. Television. 1946, that's what you're looking for. We had 7,000 TV sets. 1946, only 7,000 TV sets. By 1950, just 4 years later, we went from 7,000 to 50 million TV sets. Just blew my mind. Absolutely unbelievable. That's how important TV is going to be to the 1950s. Remember in the 1920s, everybody had what in their living room? In the 1920s, how'd they get their information? FDR is going to use it for fireside chats, a radio. But now in the 1950s, the TV is the new big thing. Television, sometimes people thought was a vast wasteland. In fact, the chairman of the Federal Communications Committee said it was because people could get lost in it. And now in 2015, think about it. Is it a vast wasteland? Reality TV in itself is a vast wasteland. Snooki and the Kardashians are just the start. So with that, the mass audience that gets created by television is going to promote, really in all reality, traditional values in the beginning. That's where things like Superman comes from, truth, justice, and the American way. If you look at this right here, this shows you right here, radios are still going to be high in the 1950s and 60s. But you'll notice that we don't even have any data in 1940 on televisions. It's not till 1950 we start having data, and then boom! Televisions are just as much as radios. This is how people are getting their information and kind of enjoying their lives as well. Now, again, I don't know. I know you don't have these slides, but I put down at the bottom what TV shows were popular. I know y'all know this one. I love Lucy. If I do my job right and I allot some time, which I should, we will actually watch a little bit of an I Love Lucy episode. I don't know if any of y'all have seen it. It's Lucy, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, one of the best TV shows ever. You guys probably have heard of Leave It to Beaver, and there's things like The Honeymooners, but you'll notice every single person you're looking at is white, Caucasian. So that's going to be another civil rights discussion for another day. Now, the popular culture, let's go ahead and get this one. Pause it and get this down. Okay, so this popular culture is going to be a consumer-driven mass economy. Remember, consumerism. Advertising, all media is extremely aggressive. This is when we start to see shopping centers and credit cards. Remember, I told you the first credit cards coming in. You're going to change from this mom and pop franchises, like, the little corner store, to now, what do we have? Where do you go when you need groceries? I go to Walmart. I normally hate it most of the time, but I go there because it's cheaper. This is where that transition comes in. Now, records, and we say records, now we just download it onto our phones, right? But this is the mass-marketed, inexpensive records. Rock and roll music becomes massively important, which whose name do you think you should be writing down? I circled his picture right down here. Who is this? Elvis. Now, why was he so controversial in the beginning? The king of pop actually did something that they wouldn't even show on TV. Ooh, good quiz question if you were listening. He shook his pelvis. I don't know if you've ever seen him dance a little bit. And oh my gosh, in the 1950s, with the very straight-laced moms and dads, they couldn't unbelievable think that he would wiggle his hips in front of their pure little children. And now, oh my God, look at what's on TV. Unbelievable. But this whole idea, oh, and of course, Marilyn Monroe, have to throw her in there. Okay, this is going to be this new idea. Oh, good EOC practice question if you want to pause it, think about it. But this new culture actually is going to spawn something we call the teen culture. Pause this, get it down. Now, the teen culture really develops because, well, teenagers now no longer going to war. They're going to high school, and then they have the weekends, and let's be honest, they get jobs, they spend money. So this culture kind of comes from the fact that teenagers get power in the 1950s. In fact, the word teenager technically did not even exist. It was added to Webster's dictionaries in the 1950s. Consumerism by 1956, 13 million teens had $7 billion to spend a year. So you think that the economy is going to start catering to them? Of course it does. Rock and roll, Elvis Presley. There was this, oh my goodness gracious, girls. If you were alive in the 1950s, it would not be, you know, like Bieber mania. Although most of y'all, I don't think, like Bieber. Hopefully, thank goodness. But there'd be this guy named James Dean. Instead of boy bands, it'd be all about him. He was in this movie called Rebel Without a Cause. Have y'all ever seen these guys dressed up in their leather jackets? If you've read the book, ooh, another good quiz question. The Outsiders, yes? You have, of course, the preppy kids and you know, what we call the Sosas, or the rebels, if you will. Juvenile delinquency sometimes. In the 1950s, literally this teen idea starts to come around. James Dean and Elvis Presley, of course, are going to kind of enable it and become icons. Marlon Brando as well. Now, with that, the other thing that we need to talk about with the teens in the 1950s is something called the Beatnik Generation. Let me pause and let you get this one down. Okay, so teen culture, Beatnik Generation, some guys named Kerouac, Ginseng, Cassidy, and William Burroughs. These guys are going to be, I don't know quite how to explain the Beatniks. It's always a really hard thing for me to do. But one thing I would say is they claimed that they were basically against the grain. If the preppy kids were what was in, they wanted to go against the grain. They were kind of like the artistic, the poetic kids, the kids that kind of were not in line with the traditional values of their parents. They wanted to kind of rebel a little bit more than the average teenager. I'll be honest with you, the Beatniks, I don't want to necessarily say they're the subset of the teenagers. They're like the artistic aspect. Kind of like the lost generation of the 1920s. They're against conformity. But these Beatniks, I want you to make a massive star out beside this slide, would directly influence the counterculture of the 1960s. Oh, it's down there. Oh, and I even put, what is the hippies going to... It's going to be the hippies. Literally, this culture is going to develop. How do you think it developed us today? Well, let's be real honest with ourselves. Teenagers do pretty much what they want today. Although, I'll be honest with you, y'all really are some amazing kids. Many people look at me like I'm crazy when I say I teach high school, but I love it. Good practice question, but I don't think I have time for it right now. Okay, so here's the last couple little bits we need to get down for this little area. The well-defined gender roles. I'll be honest with you, I didn't really do a lot with this on the slides. I just put describe a 1950s perfect household. How would you describe it? Here's what I would describe it as. White, mother, father, 2 kids, mom stays home with the kiddos, okay, and dad goes home and he's your average, if you will, kind of family man. Goes to work, comes home, mom has dinner on the table, entertains for guests, lots of different things, but these well-defined gender roles are going to be quite interesting for this time period. You know what, I don't think that we're going to have time to go into that. So big review over what we just talked about. Okay, the suburbs, baby boom, popular culture, the teenage subset is going to start growing because a lot of people are into consumerism and buying what they want. Obviously, this mom needs a new dish set, a new stove, a new apron. He needs a flannel suit. We're going to see consumerism take over. Also, of course, dad needs a car. We build highways. Eisenhower's great. The 1950s is awesome. And tune in for the next video.